60 drones flying just 30 feet above a river, decoy drones tricking Russian radars into thinking they were expensive cruise missiles, Ukrainian planners running a war game in the sky to exhaust billion-dollar Russian defenses and then striking the real targets. This was not a random drone strike. It was a layered operation designed with precision to drain Russia's resources before dealing the blows that mattered most. But what happened when Russia's defenses finally cracked? And why did this moment change the entire course of the war? Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Russian radar crews in Rostov saw warnings light up their consoles one after another. The signatures looked familiar, fast-moving, long-ranged, almost identical to incoming cruise missiles. Operators scrambled to track, lock, and fire interceptors, convinced a massive strike was about to level their sector. But the truth was unsettling. The majority of these targets didn't exist at all in the way they imagined. They were decoys, pulsing false radar reflections, creating a battlefield illusion Ukraine had prepared months in advance. The reason this deception mattered began with geography. Rostov-on-Don isn't just another Russian city, it's a fortified hub. The outskirts bristle with multiple overlapping air defense batteries. S-300 launchers split between different regiments, supported by Buk M2 systems positioned to catch anything sneaking through. Each site connects to a web of radar units, command vehicles, and hardened bunkers. For Ukraine, trying to fly conventional aircraft into that airspace would be close to suicidal. Even a coordinated cruise missile attack would struggle because those defenses can guide multiple interceptors at once, hunting low-flying threats just as easily as high-altitude bombers. A straightforward operation stood no chance against this net. That's why Ukraine's planners decided the opening blow couldn't be firepower. It had to be confusion. Engineers modified drones to transmit signatures of Storm Shadow missiles, the very weapon Russia feared most. On radar, these small propeller-driven machines became indistinguishable from a missile costing millions. As intercept warnings stacked up, commanders had to choose: fire expensive interceptors or risk watching a genuine missile slip past. They chose to fire. Each launch burned through resources that cannot be quickly replaced, firing warheads designed for supersonic threats at drones worth a fraction of the cost. The economics behind the trick was brutal. A single 48 N6 missile from the S-300 family costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce. Some estimates run higher once logistics, transport, and crew costs are considered. The Ukrainian decoys, meanwhile, were cobbled together with inexpensive airframes and electronics, averaging around $20,000 to field. That meant for every Russian interceptor fired, Ukraine could afford to launch several more drones. In a war of attrition, money and production speed became as decisive as accuracy. Flight paths made the deception even harder to counter. Many drones crept along rivers or low valleys, skimming just 30 to 50 feet above the surface. At such levels, radar waves bounce off terrain and water, jumbling signals and forcing operators to filter through clutter. Imagine trying to pick out a buzzing insect beneath a highway bridge. That's what Russian crews faced as overlapping returns turned their screens into streaks of noise. Then the swarm multiplied. Dozens moved simultaneously, not in formation, but scattered, creating too many contacts for any defense net to handle efficiently. The timing was coordinated to the minute. Decoys arrived first, triggering volleys of interceptors and forcing radar sites to emit constantly while searching for more. Only after the first wave had trapped defenders in that pattern did specialized weapons appear. Watching carefully, one Ukrainian team equipped with an American-made AGM-88 HARM locked onto a radar that exposed itself while guiding missiles toward a decoy. Less than a minute later, the site was obliterated. A phony missile had coaxed the Russians into revealing their exact position, and the real strike answered with precision. This wasn't an isolated exchange. Across the grid, interceptor silos thinned as missile stocks dwindled, while radar masts started blinking off the map. What brute force salvos could not accomplish, breaking the shield around Rostov, was achieved by trickery layered into waves of drones. The system's weaknesses weren't in its missiles or its radar technology, but in the human reaction to signals they could not afford to ignore. By the time commanders realized they had been baited, too many assets were already gone. But deception was only the opening phase. Once that protective dome fractured and blind spots opened across Rostov, Ukraine had an entirely new set of tools waiting to drive the attack forward, on the ground and in the skies above. At 5:20, the first radar mast in Rostov went down. It wasn't destroyed by a missile strike or a jet attack, but by a small Ukrainian sabotage team that carried in explosives, set their charges at the base of the tower, and slipped away under cover of darkness. The collapse of that mast sent shockwaves through the entire defense grid. Screens that had been flickering with endless drone contacts suddenly went black. For Russian commanders in bunkers outside the city, the disappearance of that radar feed left both the northern approaches wide open and crews scrambling to make sense of what was happening. The loss of radar wasn't an accident or isolated success. It was a planned pivot point. Ukrainian Ukrainian command had timed everything. The aerial feints drained missiles and forced sites to light up. And once that arc of defenses was cracked, ground teams moved in to cut power and demolish infrastructure units in sequence. Air and ground forces worked like paired gears in a machine. UAVs kept Russian eyes in the air distracted, while saboteurs handled the assets too reinforced for long-range strikes. Special operations teams didn't need dozens of men. Even small squads carried enough explosives and thermal lances to cripple a multi-million-dollar radar mast in minutes. From above, the picture was even worse for Russian forces. Armed TB-2 drones, once the standout symbol in the early months of the war, had been repositioned to hunt in pairs. These drones carried infrared sensors scanning beneath heavy morning mist, marking vehicle heat signatures, and feeding them directly to ground units crouched along ambush routes. In real time, operators patched targeting coordinates to artillery crews and to strike teams waiting with shoulder-fired missiles. Russian BMPs and fuel tankers, visible as glowing silhouettes in the infrared feeds, rolled straight into narrow zones where Ukrainian mines and teams were already waiting. That ambush unfolded fast. Just 5 minutes after radar silence spread across the north, a column of reinforcements, 2 transport trucks, an armored personnel carrier, and several support jeeps took a wrong turn down a temporary crossing area. The front vehicle detonated an anti-tank mine, halting the rest of the column. Within seconds, man-portable missiles knocked out the lead APC, and squads fired heavy machine guns into the stationary trucks. By the time smoke covered the road, survivors were abandoning vehicles without ever forming a defensive perimeter. The most devastating effect came not from shelling, but from loitering drones. A swarm of them circled the fuel depot east of Rostov. When the first drone dived into the tanks, the blast tore open rows of storage drums. Secondary ignitions created a chain reaction, engulfing the depot in fire, visible miles away. Fire brigades approached but backed off, unable to enter zones where more drones hovered overhead. By the time morning advanced, Rostov's command posts had lost radar, fuel reserves were burning to the ground, and logistics convoys were shattered on the roads. Defenses weren't just weakened, they were cut off from the very network binding them together. And beyond damage, there was something larger. The sudden realization across Russia that this wasn't only a strike on a city, it was a message broadcast through collapsing radar towers and burning fuel depots, warning that even strongholds thought secure could be taken apart step by step. The Rostov strike proved that walls of missiles and radar don't guarantee safety. What mattered was not the size of Ukraine's arsenal, but the way it turned deception, timing, and cost into weapons of their own. Expensive interceptors were drained by cheap drones, precision missiles landed only after radar nets were exposed, and small ground teams multiplied the effect. This isn't just about one battlefield. It shows how modern war is shifting towards swarms, electronic traps, and cheaper systems outthinking traditional firepower. The real question now, will the next decisive battle be won by raw force or by strategy?